I heard a voice in that shop. It knew something I've never told anyone. If you've ever driven through one of those old market towns late at night when the rain turns every lamppost into a blur and the shop fronts all look a bit dead, then you'll know the sort of place I'm talking about. Not creepy in a film sort of way, just ordinary enough that nothing should happen there. That's what made it worse. Elliot Hargreaves had been doing deliveries for nearly 4 years by that point, and he hated the late shifts. He never said that out loud at work because everyone hates the late shifts, and once you start moaning about it, people act like you're soft. But the truth was, he'd never liked being out alone after midnight. He told himself it was just tiredness, just the usual nerves you get when you're the only car on a road and every dark window looks like it might be watching you. Still, he always kept the radio on. He always preferred a bit of noise. That night, though, even the radio kept cutting in and out. It had been one of those miserable Yorkshire evenings where the rain never quite committed to becoming a storm. It just lingered. A cold, steady drizzle that soaked through your sleeves and made the pavement shine like black glass. Elliot had already done most of his route. He was wet, knackered, and irritated because he'd been handed an extra parcel at the depot with no clear postcode and a half-smeared label that only said Blackmere Lane in capital letters. No number, no flat, no business name, just that. He should have taken it back. He knew that. Looking back, that's probably the bit that bothers him most now. There were about 5 different moments where he could have made a sensible decision and gone home. And every single time he talked himself into one more minute, one more look, one more attempt to sort it properly. That's the thing people never mention when they talk about fear. Most of the time, it doesn't arrive all at once. It starts with you being practical, reasonable, slightly annoyed. Then it grows teeth when you're not looking. Blackmere Lane sat just off the main high street of a town Elliot had been through dozens of times. In the daytime, it was the sort of place you barely notice. Charity shops, a smallgery, a pub with hanging baskets outside, a chemist, a butcher's, and one of those little cobbled cut-throughs that always smell faintly of damp stone. Nothing memorable. But that night, the whole place looked wrong. The pub was shut early. No laughter outside, no scraping chairs, no smokers huddled under the awning. The takeaway on the corner had its lights off. Even the gulls from the river, the ones that usually screamed at all hours, had gone quiet. Elliot parked his van by the curb and sat there for a moment with the wipers dragging back and forth across the windscreen, feeling that odd pressure in his chest you get when somewhere familiar suddenly feels unfamiliar for no obvious reason. "I'm just dropping a parcel," he said to himself, which is the sort of thing people do when they're alone and trying not to admit they're nervous. In and out. He grabbed the package, pulled his hood up, and crossed the road. At first, he thought he'd taken a wrong turn, because halfway down the lane there was a narrow little shop, squeezed between a boarded-up card shop and an old antiques place. He stopped dead and looked at it properly through the rain. He was sure it hadn't been there before. It wasn't brightly lit. That would have been easier to explain. It had one dull amber lamp glowing in the upstairs window and a weak strip of light bleeding out from behind the frosted glass of the front door. Above the window hung a black wooden sign with faded gold lettering, Morrow and Vale Phonographs. A record shop, or what looked like one. The display window was crowded with old gramophones, stacks of shellac records, and a cracked framed photograph turned slightly away so you couldn't quite see the faces in it. There was something about the arrangement that put Elliot on edge immediately. Not because it looked sinister exactly, because it looked deliberate, too deliberate. Like someone had set the whole thing up to be noticed by one person and one person only. Then he saw the chalkboard. It was propped just outside the door where a sandwich board for offers or opening time should have been, and written on it in careful, neat white chalk were the words, "Please ring once, never twice." Elliot actually laughed under his breath when he read that. Not because he found it funny, exactly, but because his body wanted to shake off the discomfort, and that was the easiest way to do it. "What does that even mean?" he muttered. He looked up and down the lane, half expecting someone to be watching from an upstairs window, waiting for his reaction. No one was there, just rain ticking against the windows and running in threads down the glass. The parcel label had started to peel in his hand. He checked it again, more out of habit than anything. Blackmere Lane. That was all. He should have gone back to the van then. He knew that later. But there was still a sensible explanation available. And as long as a sensible explanation exists, most people will cling to it. He told himself it was a gimmicky little specialist shop. Maybe new. Maybe one of those old-fashioned businesses that trades on being eccentric. He'd met shop owners before who loved that sort of thing. Strange signs, odd manners, rules for the sake of atmosphere. He honestly thought that was all it was. But even then, he didn't like the silence. That was the bit he kept coming back to afterwards. Not the sign, not the lamp, the silence. Rain should make a place feel alive. It should tap on drains and gutters and awnings. You should hear tires hissing over wet roads, a distant siren, someone shutting a car door, music from a flat above the shops, something. Anything. But on Blackmere Lane, once Elliot stepped in front of that window, it was as though the whole town had pulled back from him. He became suddenly aware of his own breathing, of the parcel paper sticking to his fingers, of the fact that the light upstairs hadn't moved once, not even with the wind. There was a brass bell fixed to the frame beside the door, old-fashioned, properly polished. Beneath it, and even smaller writing on the glass itself, was another line he hadn't noticed at first. If no one answers, do not knock. That was the point where the nervousness really started to settle in. Not full fear. Not yet. Just that prickling feeling at the back of the neck. Too many instructions. Too specific. Too eager to control what a stranger did before they'd even walked in. He stood there longer than he meant to, staring at his own warped reflection in the dark part of the window. For a second, and he would later swear this was only because of the rain running down the glass, he thought his reflection lagged behind him. Not by much, just enough to make him blink hard and lean closer. Inside, one of the gramophone horns seemed to be angled directly at the door. Elliot stepped back at once, annoyed at himself for feeling spooked by a pile of antiques. "Get a grip," he said softly. And that's the embarrassing part, really. He knew he was uneasy. He knew something about the place was off. But he also knew if he walked away from a simple parcel drop because of a weird sign and a creepy window, he'd spend the whole drive home feeling ridiculous. So he did what people always do when they're desperate not to look frightened. He tried to act normal. He tucked the parcel under one arm, reached for the bell, and hesitated with his finger hovering over the metal. It was cold enough to sting. "I'm ringing once," he said under his breath, like the shop might be listening. Then he pressed it. The sound that came out wasn't the bright little ding he expected. It was softer than that. Older. A thin metallic note that seemed to linger too long in the rain, as though it had gone somewhere deeper than the walls. Elliot waited. Nothing. No footsteps, no voice calling out, no movement behind the frosted glass. For one mad second he considered ringing again. His hand even twitched toward it. But something, pride, instinct, common sense, he never worked out which, stopped him. And then from somewhere inside the shop he heard a lock turn. Not quickly, not casually, slowly, carefully, like whoever was on the other side had been standing there the whole time, listening to him breathe through the door. That was the moment Elliot first felt real fear, and not the fun sort people talk about after horror films. Something colder, something private, the sort that makes your stomach drop before your mind catches up. Because right then, with the rain behind him, and the silent lane stretching empty in both directions, he realized he didn't want the door to open anymore. But it did. The door didn't swing open the way Elliot expected. It didn't creak, didn't stick, didn't even move in a way that felt natural. It just eased inward, smooth, quiet, like it had already decided to let him in long before he touched the bell. For a second, Elliot didn't step forward. He stood there on the threshold with the rain hitting the back of his coat, looking into the dim interior and trying to convince himself there was nothing wrong with any of this. It was just a shop. A strange one, maybe. But still a shop. "I've got a delivery," he called, keeping his voice casual. No answer. But the light inside shifted slightly, like someone had moved just out of sight. Elliot hesitated again, then stepped in. The moment he crossed the threshold, The sound of the rain dulled. Not completely gone, but muffled, like he'd stepped into a different kind of space where outside noise wasn't quite allowed to exist properly. He noticed it straight away, his shoulders tensed without him meaning to. The door closed behind him, not slammed, not even firmly. It just clicked shut with a soft, precise sound that made something in his chest tighten. "Hello?" He tried again, louder this time. The shop smelled faintly of dust and something else, something warm and slightly metallic, like old wires or overheated equipment. Rows of gramophones filled the space, their brass horns catching the weak light and throwing it back in dull, distorted shapes. Shelves were packed with records, thick black discs and worn sleeves, some labeled in handwriting so faded it was almost gone. Elliot shifted the parcel in his hands, suddenly very aware of how loud even small movements felt in the silence. "I'm just dropping this off," he said. "No one at the depot could." "I heard." The voice came from his right, so close that Elliot flinched. He turned sharply. An old man stood beside the counter, as if he'd always been there. Elliot hadn't heard him approach, hadn't seen him move. One moment the space had been empty, and the next, "Well," the man said softly, adjusting his cuffs as though nothing about this was unusual, "that saves us time." He was tall, though slightly stooped, dressed in a dark waistcoat and a long-sleeved shirt buttoned neatly at the collar. His hair was thin and gray, combed back with an almost obsessive precision. But it was his expression that unsettled Elliot most. Not unfriendly, not welcoming either, just attentive, like he'd been expecting Elliot specifically. "You're the delivery driver," the man added. Elliot forced a small nod. "Yeah, that's right." The man's gaze flicked briefly to the parcel, then back to Elliot's face. "You're late." That caught Elliot off guard. "Sorry, it's nearly closing," the man said, as though that explained everything. Elliot glanced at his watch out of instinct. It was only just past midnight. "Right? Well, I didn't have a time slot. This one just came through last minute." The man stepped closer, and Elliot had the oddest sensation that the space between them hadn't quite behaved properly, as if the distance had shortened more than it should have with a single step. "May I?" the man asked, nodding toward the parcel. Elliot handed it over without thinking. The man took it, weighed it lightly in his hands, then turned it once, examining the label. For a moment, something flickered across his face. Not confusion, not recognition exactly, something sharper. "This isn't for me," he said. Elliot blinked. "It's got Blackmere Lane on it." "Yes," the man replied calmly, placing the parcel on the counter without opening it. "But not for me." There was a pause. Elliot let out a short breath. "Right, okay, that's fine. I can take it back and—" "You came in," the man interrupted gently. Elliot frowned. "Yeah, well, the door was open. You rang the bell." "Once," Elliot said quickly, before he could stop himself. The man's eyes lingered on him for just a fraction too long. "Good," he said. Something about the way he said it made Elliot's stomach twist. "I'll just head off then," Elliot added, already turning slightly toward the door. "You can," the man said. "Of course you can." But he didn't move out of the way. Instead, he rested one hand lightly on the counter, fingers tapping once, just once, against the wood, as if marking a rhythm only he could hear. "I would suggest," he continued, voice still polite, still measured, "that you take a moment before you leave." Elliot stopped. He didn't want to ask why. Every instinct told him not to encourage whatever this was. But at the same time, there was that creeping, insistent feeling that he'd already stepped too far into something he didn't understand. "What do you mean?" he asked. The man tilted his head slightly, studying him. "Only that it's better to understand the rules of a place," he said, "before deciding you're finished with it." Elliot let out a small, nervous laugh. "It's just a shop." "Yes," the man said, and for the first time there was something in his voice that didn't match his expression. "Just a shop." The silence that followed pressed in harder than before. Elliot glanced toward the door again. It was still there, closed, ordinary. Nothing stopping him from walking out. He told himself that. Still, he didn't move. "Look," he said, trying to regain some control of the situation, "if this isn't your parcel, I'll take it back. No problem. I've got a few more drops anyway." "That would be wise," the man replied, another pause. "But before you go," he added, almost as an afterthought, "there are two things you should know." Elliot's grip tightened slightly on the strap of his bag. "Right." The man gestured lightly toward the interior of the shop, though his eyes never left Elliot's face. "The first," he said, "is that you mustn't answer if you hear your name called from the back room." Elliot felt a flicker of irritation. "Sorry?" "It won't be addressed to you," the man continued, as though explaining something simple. "Not properly, but it will sound convincing." Elliot stared at him. "You're joking." "No," the man said. There was no humor in it, no hint that this was anything but serious. Elliot shifted his weight, suddenly aware of the curtain hanging at the far end of the shop, a thick, dark green fabric separating the main floor from whatever lay beyond. He hadn't noticed it before. Or maybe he had, and just hadn't paid attention. "You've got someone back there?" Elliot asked, trying to keep his tone light. "Not in the way you mean," the man replied. That didn't help. Elliot forced another small laugh, though it came out thinner this time. "Right. Okay, and the second thing?" The man's fingers stopped tapping. "For your sake," he said quietly, "don't stay longer than you need to." Elliot frowned. "I'm not planning to. People rarely are." That landed heavier than it should have. Elliot took a step back, more deliberate this time. "Look, I appreciate the advice, but I really do need to get going." "Of course," the man said again. Still, he didn't move. Elliot hesitated, then took another step toward the door. His hand reached for the handle, and somewhere behind the green curtain, something shifted. Not loudly, just enough, a faint scrape, like something brushing lightly against wood. Elliot froze. He told himself it was nothing. Old floorboards, a loose object, anything ordinary. Then, very softly, from the other side of the curtain, he heard his name. "Elliot!" It wasn't loud, it wasn't distorted. If anything, it was too clear, too familiar. Elliot's throat tightened as he stared toward the curtain, every muscle in his body suddenly rigid. Because for a moment, just a moment, he could have sworn it sounded exactly like his mom. Elliot didn't move, he couldn't. It wasn't just the sound of his name, it was the way it was said. Soft, careful, familiar in a way that went straight past logic and landed somewhere much deeper, somewhere he hadn't let himself touch in years. "Elliot? Love?" His chest tightened so suddenly it almost hurt. No, that wasn't. He shook his head once, sharply, as if that alone might snap something back into place. "No," he muttered under his breath. "No, that's not." But the voice came again, a little clearer this time, a little closer. "You left the kettle on again, didn't you?" Elliot's breath caught. That was wrong. That was very, very wrong. Because that wasn't just his mom's voice. That was something she used to say, something small, ordinary, the sort of thing no one else would remember, let alone repeat like that. He felt the urge to answer before he even realized it was happening. "Yeah, I don't." The word cut through the moment like a blade. Elliot flinched and turned. Mr. Vale was watching him, his expression no longer calm. There was something tight in his face now, urgent, controlled, but only just. "I told you," he said quietly, "you mustn't answer." Elliot swallowed hard, his mouth suddenly dry. That's not possible," he said, though it came out more like a question than a statement. "That's just a recording or something. You've got speakers back there, yeah? Old shop trick, bit of theater." "Does it feel like theater to you?" Val asked. Elliot didn't answer. Because no, it didn't. The air in the shop had changed. He was sure of it now. It felt heavier, like the space itself was leaning in, listening with him. Even the faint hum he hadn't noticed before, the low, almost inaudible vibration in the walls, seemed to shift like it was responding. From behind the curtain, the floor creaked. One step, then another, slow, measured. Elliot's eyes locked onto the dark fold of fabric. He could see the outline of it now, the slight movement near the bottom where it brushed against the floorboards. "Elliot," the voice said again, softer this time. "You can come in, you know. It's cold out there." His throat tightened painfully. That was exactly how she used to say it. When he'd come home late, soaked through from the rain, pretending he didn't care. He took a step forward before he realized he was doing it. "Don't," Vale said again, sharper now. Elliot stopped, but only just. "That's not real," he whispered, more to himself than anyone else. "It's not. It can't be." "No," Vale said, his voice lower now, steadier. "It isn't." "Then how? You don't want the answer to that." The curtain shifted again. This time, Elliot saw it clearly. Something was standing just behind it. Not a full shape, not a person he could recognize. Just a darker presence against the dim light filtering through from the back room. close enough that if the fabric moved even slightly more, it would press right up against it. Waiting. Elliot's pulse hammered in his ears. "This is stupid," he said, suddenly, louder now, forcing a laugh that didn't sound like his own. "This is actually stupid. I'm standing in a shop, talking to someone's, I don't know, sound system or whatever, like it's real." No one responded. The silence stretched. Then, from behind the curtain, a hand pressed slowly against the fabric. Elliot staggered back. He didn't even realize he'd moved until his shoulder hit one of the shelves, sending a faint rattle through the stacked records. The shape of the hand was wrong, too still, too flat. Like it wasn't quite pressing from the right angle. The fingers were there, but they didn't move properly. They just rested there, outlined faintly through the material. And then, it tapped. Once. A slow, deliberate knock from the other side. Elliot felt something inside him drop. Not fear exactly, something deeper. Recognition, because for a split second his mind tried to make sense of it, tried to match it to something human, something normal, someone standing there viewed out, but nothing about it lined up. "That's not a person," he said quietly. Vale didn't reply straight away. When he did, his voice was softer than before, almost tired. "No," he said, "it isn't." Elliot dragged a hand through his hair, his thoughts scrambling for something solid to hold on to. "Right, okay, so what is it then?" Vale's eyes flicked briefly toward the curtain, then back to Elliot. "It's listening," he said. Elliot blinked. "Listening to what?" "To you." That landed harder than anything else so far. Elliot let out a short, disbelieving breath. "To me, I've been here. What, 2 minutes? That's more than enough." Behind the curtain, the hand slid slowly downward, leaving the fabric still. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the voice changed. Not completely. Not in a way you could point to and say that's different. But something in it shifted. The tone, maybe. The intention. "Elliot," it said again. But this time, it didn't sound like his mum. It sounded like him. Same pitch, same rhythm, same slight hesitation on the last syllable. Elliot felt his stomach twist violently. "No," he whispered. "You hear it now." Vale said. Elliot shook his head, backing away from the curtain again, his breathing quickening. No, that's just what?" Vale asked quietly. Elliot couldn't answer, because there wasn't an explanation left. The voice behind the curtain let out a soft breath, his breath. "You don't have to be out there," it said. "You can stay." Elliot's heart was racing now, his thoughts slipping, scrambling for anything that made sense. "I'm leaving," he said suddenly, louder this time, forcing the words out. "I'm done. I'm going." He turned sharply toward the door and grabbed the handle. It didn't move. He pulled harder. Nothing. The handle felt solid in his hand, but the door itself didn't budge, not even a fraction. "What?" He yanked again, panic creeping in now, sharp and immediate. "It's locked," he said, turning back toward Vale. Vale didn't look surprised. "No," he said quietly, "it isn't." "Then why won't it open?" Vale held his gaze for a long moment. Then, very carefully, he said, "because it doesn't think you finished yet." Elliot's chest tightened as he slowly turned back toward the curtain. Behind it, something shifted again. Closer this time. And before he could stop himself, before he could think, he took a step toward it. Elliot didn't remember deciding to move. 1 second he was at the door, his hand still gripping the handle, breath coming too fast, mind racing for a way out. And the next, he was halfway across the shop again, drawn back toward that curtain like something had quietly taken hold of him and started pulling. "Stop," Vale said, low and controlled. Elliot did stop, but not because he wanted to. It felt more like something inside him hesitated, like two instincts had collided at once, one telling him to run, the other whispering, just as softly as the voice behind the curtain, that he should stay. "I'm not," Elliot swallowed hard. "I'm not doing that. I'm not going in there." "Good," Vale said. "Then don't." Simple words. But Elliot couldn't shake the feeling that they were too late. Behind the curtain, the shape shifted again, no longer just a vague outline. It was closer now, close enough that the fabric bulged slightly outward, like something was leaning its weight against it from the other side, waiting, listening. Elliot forced himself to take a step back, then another, until his shoulder brushed the edge of the counter. He grabbed onto it, grounding himself, eyes still fixed on that unmoving stretch of green cloth. "That's not real," he said again, but it sounded weaker this time. It's just copying." That's all it's doing. Yes, Vale said quietly. That's all it ever does. There was something in his tone, something grim, almost resigned, that made Elliot look at him properly for the first time. You've seen this before, Elliot said. Vale didn't answer straight away. Instead, he moved slowly around the counter, putting himself just slightly between Elliot and the curtain, not blocking him, not protecting him, but positioning himself. I've heard it, he said at last. That's not what I asked. No, Vale replied. It's what you meant. Elliot stared at him. So what happens if you answer it? Vale's gaze didn't shift. You already tried to. Elliot's stomach dropped. That was true. He hadn't even realized he'd been about to speak until the word was already halfway out of his mouth, like a reflex, like something automatic. That's not the same, Elliot said quickly. I didn't actually. You don't need to finish, Vale interrupted. It only needs you to start. The silence that followed felt heavier than anything before it. Elliot glanced back at the curtain. It hadn't moved, but somehow that was worse. Right? Elliot said after a moment, forcing his voice to steady. Okay, so it copies voices. Fine. Creepy, but fine. There's got to be an explanation for that. Some kind of recording setup, or it isn't a machine. Elliot let out a sharp breath. Then what is it? Vale's expression didn't change. That depends, he said, on how long you stay. Elliot blinked. What's that supposed to mean? It learns. The word landed quietly, but it carried weight. Elliot felt it settle somewhere in the back of his mind, where it immediately started to grow into something far worse than he wanted it to be. Learns what? He asked. Vale looked at him carefully. You. Elliot shook his head at once. No, I've been here. What, 5 minutes? There's nothing to learn. Isn't there? Val's voice wasn't mocking. That made it worse. Elliot opened his mouth to argue, then stopped, because in those 5 minutes, it had known his name. It had known his mom's voice. It had known what she used to say. And now it sounded like him. A cold, creeping realization began to settle in his chest. That's not possible, he said again, but the words felt hollow now. Vale didn't respond. Behind the curtain, something shifted. Not a step this time, something else, a sound. Faint at first, barely there, then clearer, a low crackling. Elliot's head snapped toward it. What is that? Vale's jaw tightened slightly. Don't listen to it. Too late. The sound grew louder. That unmistakable, dry, brittle hiss of an old vinyl record spinning on a needle. Elliot frowned. You've got something playing back there? No. The crackle deepened, layered, like multiple records turning at once, just slightly out of sync. Elliot felt his skin prickle. That's not, he started. Then the voices came. Not one, not two, dozens, all low, all overlapping, too quiet to make out clearly, but loud enough to feel, like a room full of people whispering at the same time. Elliot's chest tightened as he strained to listen despite himself. Hello, please. Don't leave. Fragments, broken pieces, none of them complete. He took a step back, shaking his head. No, what is that? Vale didn't answer immediately. When he did, his voice was quieter than Elliot had heard it so far. That's what's left. Elliot's stomach twisted. Of what? Vale's eyes flicked briefly toward the curtain, then back to him. Of the ones who stayed. The words hit harder than anything else so far. Elliot let out a short, disbelieving laugh, but there was no humor in it. Right. Okay, no. I'm not doing this. I'm not listening to ghost stories in a shop that shouldn't even be here. Then leave. I'm trying to. He turned back to the door, grabbing the handle again, pulling harder this time, frustration bleeding into panic. It didn't move, not even slightly. Elliot's breathing quickened. This isn't funny anymore, he snapped. If this is some kind of trick. It isn't. Then why won't it open? Vale stepped closer, his voice dropping. Because you heard it. Elliot froze. What? You heard it call you, Vale said. You listened. Elliot shook his head immediately. I didn't answer. You didn't need to. The crackling behind the curtain grew louder. The whispers began to shift. Not random anymore. Not scattered. They were starting to align. Elliot felt it before he understood it. That slow creeping sense that something was focusing, that all those voices were narrowing. Elliot. He flinched. Elliot. Louder now. Clearer. More deliberate. Elliot backed away from the curtain again, his heel catching slightly on the uneven floorboards. No, he said under his breath. No. You should have left when you had the chance, Val said quietly. Elliot's head snapped toward him. You said I could go. I said you should. That's not the same thing. No, Vale agreed. It isn't. The voices behind the curtain dropped suddenly into silence, complete, total. The kind of silence that presses in on your ears until you start to hear your own pulse. Elliot felt it in his throat, his temples, his fingertips. Then, the curtain moved. Not a twitch, not a shift. It drew inward slightly, as if something behind it had stepped back, making space. Elliot's breath caught. "Why did it stop?" he whispered. Vale didn't answer straight away. When he did, his voice was almost too quiet to hear, because it doesn't need to call anymore. Elliot felt something cold slide down his spine. "What does that mean?" Vale looked at him, and for the first time there was something like pity in his expression. "It knows you're listening now," he said. The silence stretched. Then, from behind the curtain, very softly, Elliot heard it again. Not his mom's voice, not his own. Something in between, something closer. "Come and see." Elliot didn't realize he was moving again until the floorboards creaked under his weight. It was subtle. That was the worst part. There was no sudden decision, no clear moment where he thought, "I'm going to walk toward it." It just happened. One slow step, then another. Careful, quiet, like he didn't want to disturb whatever was waiting on the other side. "Elliot." Vale's voice came sharper this time. "Stop." Elliot did stop, but only for a second. His eyes were fixed on the curtain now, drawn to the faint outline behind it. The shape had changed again. It wasn't pressed up against the fabric anymore. It had retreated, just enough to make space, just enough to make it look like an invitation. "I just need to see," Elliot murmured, his voice distant, almost detached. "That's all, just to prove it's nothing." "That's exactly how it works," Vale said, stepping forward quickly now, his composure finally cracking. "You don't prove anything in there. You only give it more." Elliot shook his head, but the motion felt slow, delayed. "You keep saying that, but you're not actually explaining anything." "I am," Vale snapped. "You're just choosing not to hear it." That stung more than Elliot expected. He turned slightly, just enough to look at him. "Then say it properly. What is it?" Vale hesitated. And that hesitation, just a second too long, told Elliot more than any answer could have. "You don't know," Elliot said. "I know enough. That's not the same thing." "No," Vale said quietly. "It's worse." The air in the shop shifted again. Elliot felt it this time, clear as anything, like a pressure change, like the moment before a storm finally breaks. Behind the curtain, something moved. Not a step, something lower, a dragging sound, slow, deliberate. Elliot's stomach tightened as the shape began to rise again, stretching upward, reshaping itself against the dim glow behind the fabric. "Elliot," the voice whispered. It was closer now, too close. And there was something else in it this time, not just familiarity, expectation. "You've already heard us." Us. That word landed wrong. Elliot frowned, the fog in his head thinning just enough for something sharper to push through. "Us?" he repeated. Vale didn't respond. Elliot's eyes flicked toward him, then back to the curtain. The shape shifted again, and for a split second, just a fraction, the fabric pulled tight enough for Elliot to see more than an outline. Not a face, not properly, but layers, like more than one shape trying to occupy the same space at once. His breath hitched. "That's not," he started, then stopped, because there wasn't a word for it. Behind him, Vale spoke again, quieter now, more controlled, like he'd forced himself back into that careful, measured tone. "It doesn't just copy," he said. "It keeps." Elliot didn't take his eyes off the curtain. "Keeps what?" Vale's answer came slowly. "Whatever answers it." The words settled heavily in the space between them. Elliot swallowed. "I didn't answer." Vale didn't argue. He didn't agree either. That silence said enough. A cold, creeping realization began to take shape in Elliot's mind, piecing itself together from everything he'd seen, everything he'd heard. The voices, the way they overlapped, the way they shifted, the way they almost sounded right but never quite. "They're still in there," Elliot said quietly. Vale closed his eyes for a brief moment. "Yes." The word barely made a sound. Elliot's chest tightened. "That's not possible." "No," Vale agreed again. "It isn't. But you just said," "I said that's what's left. That was worse. Much worse." Elliot took a step back this time, his movement sharper, more deliberate. The pull was still there, but it was weaker now. Or maybe he was just more aware of it. "So what happens?" he asked, his voice steadier than he felt. "If someone stays too long?" Vale opened his eyes. "They stop leaving." Elliot let out a short breath. That's not an answer. It's the only one you're getting. Behind the curtain, the shape shifted again. This time, it leaned forward, not fully, not enough to break through, just enough. And then, very slowly, a second shape appeared beside it. Elliot's heart skipped. Then a third, faint, barely visible, but there. His pulse began to race again, faster now, sharper. "That's not," he whispered. But he didn't finish the sentence because deep down, he knew. The crackling sound returned, louder this time, layered beneath the silence like something trying to push through. The whispers followed, not scattered anymore, not broken. They were clearer now, more focused. "Stay. Don't go. You're already here." Elliot clamped his hands over his ears, stepping back again. No, I'm not listening to this." "You already are," Vale said. "Then make it stop." "I can't." That answer hit harder than anything else. Elliot lowered his hands slowly, his breathing uneven. "What do you mean you can't?" he demanded. "This is your shop." Vale gave a small, humorless smile. "No," he said quietly. "It isn't." Elliot stared at him. "What?" "I just keep it in place," Vale continued, "as best I can." That explained nothing and everything. Elliot's mind raced, trying to make sense of it, trying to find something logical, something grounded. "There has to be a way out," he said. "There's always a way out." Vale didn't respond straight away. When he did, his voice had changed again. Not sharper, not colder, just tired. "There was," he said. Elliot's stomach dropped. "Was?" Vale nodded once. "Before you heard it properly." Elliot turned slowly back toward the curtain. The shapes behind it were clearer now. Not solid, not fully formed, but closer than before. Too close. The air felt thick in his lungs, heavy with something he couldn't name. "Then what happens now?" he asked quietly. Vale looked at him, really looked at him, and this time there was no distance in it, no detachment, just a quiet, unsettling certainty. "Now," he said, "it decides whether you're leaving." The words hung in the air, cold, final. Behind the curtain, something moved forward, and for the first time, the fabric shifted just enough for something on the other side to begin pushing through. Elliot didn't wait to see what came through. The moment the fabric stretched, just slightly, just enough for something behind it to press forward, something in him snapped back into place. Not courage, not control, just raw instinct. He stumbled backwards, knocking into the edge of the counter hard enough to rattle the record stacked there. No, I'm done," he said, his voice shaking now. No attempt left to hide it. "I'm not staying for this. I'm not." "Then go." Vale's voice cut in sharply. Elliot didn't argue this time. He turned and grabbed the door handle again, harder than before, desperate now. And this time, it opened. Not gradually, not reluctantly. It just gave way. Cold air rushed in, along with the sound of rain hitting pavement, loud and immediate and painfully normal. Elliot didn't look back. He stepped out into the street, almost slipping on the wet stone as he moved too fast, his breath coming in short, uneven bursts. The silence of the lane shattered around him. Distant traffic, the faint hum of a street lamp, water running along the gutter. Normal. Everything was suddenly overwhelmingly normal. He staggered a few steps away from the shop before finally turning back. The door was closed. The window looked the same. The chalkboard still stood there, the white letters bright against the dark. "Please ring once, never twice." No movement inside, no shadows behind the glass, nothing. Elliot stood there, chest heaving, rain soaking through his coat again, trying to make sense of what had just happened. It already felt thinner, like the edges of it were slipping away. "That's not real," he said under his breath, forcing the words out. "That's not real. That didn't happen." But even as he said it, he could still hear it, faint, somewhere behind the door. The crackle. Elliot turned and walked back to the van without another word. He didn't sleep that night, or the next, or the one after that. At first, he told himself it was just adrenaline, just his brain replaying something strange and trying to file it away properly. That's what people do, isn't it? You see something odd, something you can't quite explain, and your mind keeps circling it until it fits. Except this didn't fit. Every time Elliot closed his eyes, he saw the curtain. Not clearly, just the outline, the shape behind it, waiting. And the voice, that was the worst part, because it didn't stay in the shop. The first time he heard it again, he thought he was dreaming. He was lying in bed, staring at the ceiling, watching the faint glow of streetlights shift through the thin gap in its curtains. The flat was quiet, completely quiet. Then Elliot. He sat up instantly. heart racing, listening, nothing, just silence. He stayed like that for a long time, barely breathing, telling himself it had been nothing, a dream slipping into waking. It happens. Everyone's had that moment where a sound follows you out of sleep. Except he hadn't been asleep. The second time was worse. It happened the next evening, just as he was making tea. The kettle clicked off with a soft snap, and as he reached for it, "You left it on again." Elliot froze. The kitchen felt suddenly too small, too quiet. He turned slowly. No one there. Of course no one was there. But the words hung in the air anyway, as if they'd been spoken seconds ago. He backed out of the kitchen without finishing the tea. That was when he started checking the locks. Not once, not twice, 3, 4, 5 times before bed. And still, he didn't feel safe. By the third day, he couldn't ignore it anymore. It wasn't just in his head. It couldn't be, because it wasn't random. It followed patterns, moments, silences. He started noticing it most when things went quiet, when the TV was off, when his phone wasn't in his hand, when there was nothing to drown it out. That was when the faintest sound would creep in. Not always a voice, sometimes just that crackle, low, dry, like something spinning somewhere just out of sight. Elliot began leaving the television on overnight, not for comfort exactly, more to fill the space, to make sure there was always something louder than whatever that was. It helped, a bit, but not enough. He went back to Blackmere Lane 4 days later, not because he wanted to, because he needed to. The town looked completely different in daylight, busy, alive, people moving between shops, chatting, laughing, carrying bags, standing outside the pub with pints, even though it was barely noon. Elliot stood at the entrance of the lane for a long moment, staring down it, trying to line up what he remembered with what he was seeing. It didn't match, not quite. The space where the record shop had been wasn't a shop, it was boarded up. Old wood nailed across the front, weathered and gray, with faded posters peeling off in strips. No sign, no window display, no chalkboard, nothing. Elliot frowned and walked closer. The building looked like it had been empty for years. He stepped right up to it, staring at the boards, at the rusted lock on the door, at the dirt gathered along the edges like no one had touched it in a very long time. "This is it," he muttered. It had to be. Same position, same spacing between the buildings, but it wasn't the same. Not anymore. "You're not the first to look confused." The voice came from behind him. Elliot turned. An older woman stood a few steps away, watching him with a kind of quiet interest. Late 60s, maybe. Neatly dressed, hair pinned back, the sort of person who looked like she noticed more than she said. "I'm not confused," Elliot replied quickly. The woman raised an eyebrow slightly. "You're standing outside a boarded-up shop like you expect it to open." Elliot hesitated. Then after a moment he said, "It was open, a few nights ago." The woman didn't laugh, didn't dismiss him. If anything, her expression tightened. "What night?" she asked. "Monday," Elliot said, "late, around midnight." The woman held his gaze for a long moment. Then she sighed. "Of course it was," she said quietly. Elliot felt a cold knot form in his stomach. "You've seen it too," he said. The woman didn't answer straight away. Instead, she glanced once at the boarded-up door, then back at him. "My name's Judith Fenwick," she said. "And if you went in there, you'd better come with me." Elliot blinked. "Why?" Judith's expression didn't change. "Because if you heard anything inside that building," she said, "you don't have as much time as you think." The words landed hard, too hard to ignore. Elliot hesitated for only a second, then followed her. Judith didn't take him far. Just across the high street, past the bakery, and into a narrow side road where everything felt quieter again. Not unnaturally silent like that night, but the kind of quiet that settles in older places, where the buildings seem to lean inward slightly, holding the sound in. Her house sat halfway down the road, small, brick, curtains drawn, but not in a way that looked paranoid, just private. "Inside," she said, already unlocking the door. Elliot hesitated on the step. He wasn't sure what he expected anymore, but the last time he'd followed someone into a place without asking enough questions, it hadn't gone well. Judith glanced back at him. "If you're worried about me, you're wasting your time. I'm not the problem here." That was enough. He stepped in. The house smelled faintly of tea and old books, warm, lived in. Nothing like the shop. And for the first time in days, Elliot felt something loosen slightly in his chest. "Sit," Judith said, gesturing toward a small armchair. You look like you haven't slept." "I haven't," Elliot admitted. "Thought not." She disappeared into the kitchen, leaving him alone in the front room. Elliot sat stiffly, his eyes drifting over the space without really focusing. Bookshelves, framed photographs, a small clock ticking steadily on the wall. Normal things, grounded things. He let out a slow breath. "You said I don't have much time?" he called after her. "I did." "That's a bit vague, isn't it?" "It's meant to be." She returned with 2 mugs of tea and set one in front of him. Elliot wrapped his hands around it immediately, more for something to hold than anything else. Judith didn't sit straight away. She stood by the window for a moment, pulling the curtain back just enough to glance outside. "Tell me exactly what you heard," she said. Elliot frowned slightly. "Why?" "Because the details matter," he hesitated. Then slowly he said, "It said my name, at first." Judith nodded once. "Of course it did." "And then," he swallowed, "then it sounded like my mum." Judith's hand tightened slightly on the edge of the curtain. "What did it say?" she asked. Elliot stared into his tea. "Things she used to say," he replied. "Small things, stuff no one else would know." Judith let the curtain fall back into place. "And after that?" Elliot shifted in his seat. "It changed." "How?" "It started sounding like me." That made her turn, properly this time. Her expression had lost whatever calm it had before. "Are you sure?" she asked. Elliot let out a short, humorless breath. "I wish I wasn't." Judith walked slowly over and sat opposite him. "Did you answer it?" she asked. Elliot shook his head immediately. "No, I nearly did, but no, I didn't." "Nearly," Judith repeated. Elliot looked up at her. "That matters?" "Yes." "How much?" Judith didn't reply straight away. Instead, she studied him in a way that made Elliot uncomfortable, like she was trying to see past what he was saying and measure something underneath. "Enough," she said finally, "that you might still be here in a week." Elliot felt his stomach drop. "Might?" he said. "That's not exactly reassuring." "No," Judith said quietly, "it isn't." Silence settled between them. Elliot took a sip of the tea, barely tasting it. "So what is it?" he asked. "That shop, that thing behind the curtain." Judith leaned back slightly, folding her hands in her lap. "It wasn't always a shop," she said. Elliot frowned. "Then what was it?" "A house, a long time ago. Late 70s, I think. It belonged to a man called Arthur Morrow." The name tugged faintly at something, though Elliot couldn't place why. "He was a bit unusual," Judith continued. "Kept to himself, had an interest in sound recording, old equipment, experimental things." Elliot let out a small breath. "That tracks." "There was a fire," she said. The way she said it made Elliot sit up slightly. "What kind of fire?" "The kind that leaves very little behind," Judith replied. "Started upstairs, late at night. Neighbors said they heard something before it spread. Not shouting, not panic." She paused. "Music." Elliot felt a cold prickle run down his arms. "They found his wife and daughter in the front room," she went on. "Or what was left of them. Morrow himself survived. Barely." Elliot swallowed. "And after that?" "He never really left," Judith said. "Not properly. The building was condemned, boarded up, but people still noticed things." Elliot leaned forward slightly. "Like what?" Judith met his gaze. "Voices," she said. That word landed heavily. "Same as you?" "Not always," she replied, "but always familiar, always personal." Elliot looked away, his grip tightening on the mug. "And the shop?" he asked. "That wasn't boarded up when I saw it." "No," Judith said. "It wouldn't be." Elliot frowned. "What's that supposed to mean?" "It doesn't appear the same way twice," she explained. "Sometimes it looks like a shop, sometimes something else. But it always fits, just enough to make you step inside." Elliot let out a slow breath. "So it's not always there?" "No." "Then why me?" Judith's expression softened slightly. "Because you were alone," she said. That answer hit harder than he expected. Elliot gave a small, defensive shrug. "Loads of people are alone." "Yes," Judith agreed, "but not everyone listens." Silence again. Elliot stared down at the tea, watching the faint ripple on its surface as his hands trembled slightly. "I left," he said after a moment. "I got out. That's got to count for something." "It does," Judith said. "But?" She didn't answer immediately. Elliot looked up at her. "There's a but, isn't there?" Judith sighed quietly. "It doesn't let go straight away," she said. Elliot's chest tightened. "What does that mean?" "It means," she replied, "if it started paying attention to you, it doesn't stop just because you walked out the door." Elliot leaned back in the chair, a hollow feeling opening up in his chest. "I've been hearing things," he admitted. At home. Judith nodded as though she'd expected that. What kind of things? Voices, he said, mostly when it's quiet, sometimes just static, like a record spinning. Judith closed her eyes briefly. How often? She asked. Every night, Elliot said. Sometimes during the day if it's too quiet. And it's getting clearer? Elliot hesitated. Then, yeah. Judith opened her eyes again. That's not good, she said. Elliot let out a short laugh, sharp with nerves. Yeah, I gathered that. She leaned forward slightly. You need to understand something, she said. This isn't just following you, it's learning you. Elliot stiffened. Vale said that too. Judith's expression flickered. You saw him? Yeah, Elliot said. Old bloke, runs the place. Judith shook her head slowly. No one runs that place. Elliot frowned. He was there. Yes, she said. He always is. Something about the way she said that made Elliot's skin crawl. What is he then? Elliot asked. Judith didn't answer directly. Instead, she said, if he told you to leave, you should be grateful you did. Elliot leaned forward again. That doesn't answer my question. No, Judith said quietly. It doesn't. Another silence, this one heavier. Elliot rubbed his face with both hands, trying to think, trying to push through the creeping dread that had settled in his chest since he'd stepped into that shop. So what do I do? He asked finally. Judith didn't hesitate. Don't listen. Elliot let out a breath. That's not exactly easy when it's in your own flat. Keep noise on, she said. Television, radio, anything. Don't give it silence. Elliot nodded slowly. Just, I've been doing that. Good. And if it calls my name? Judith held his gaze. Don't answer. Elliot gave a weak smile. Right, that again. I'm serious. I know. She leaned back again, her expression tightening slightly. And don't go back there, she added. Elliot hesitated. That hesitation was small, but it was there. Judith noticed it immediately. No, she said firmly. Don't even think about it. I wasn't. You were. Elliot looked away. People always think they can fix it. Judith said. Understand it. End it. They can't. Elliot frowned. So what? I just live with this? For now, she said. That's not an answer either. It's the only one you've got. Elliot sat there in silence, the weight of it settling over him. Outside, the rain had started again. Light, steady, tapping faintly against the window. For a moment, everything felt almost normal again. Safe, even. Then, very faintly from somewhere deep in the house, Elliot heard it. A soft, dry crackle. Like a record turning. His head snapped up. Judith froze. They both listened. The sound stopped. Just like that. Gone. Elliot's chest tightened as he slowly looked at her. You heard that, he said. Judith didn't answer straight away. When she did, her voice was quieter than before. Yes. The word hung in the air, and for the first time since he left the shop, Elliot realized something that made his stomach drop. It wasn't just following him. It had already found somewhere else to be. Neither of them spoke for a long moment after that. The silence in Judith's front room felt different now. Before, it had been calm, settled, the kind of quiet you'd expect in an old house with thick walls and no traffic outside. Now, it felt occupied. Not loud, not obvious, just wrong in a way Elliot couldn't quite explain, like there was something just beneath the surface of it, waiting for the space to open up again. Judith was the first to move. She stood slowly, her eyes still fixed on the hallway, listening as if she expected the sound to return. It shouldn't be here, she said quietly. Elliot swallowed. You just told me it follows. Yes, she replied, distracted, already moving toward the door. But not like that. Then like what? Judith didn't answer. She stepped into the hallway, and after a brief hesitation, Elliot followed. The house felt smaller out here, narrower, the kind of space where every footstep carries. Stay there, Judith said, holding up a hand. Elliot stopped. She walked further down the hall, her movements careful, deliberate. There was a door at the far end, slightly ajar, the darkness beyond it deeper than the rest of the house. Elliot's chest tightened. That's where it came from, he said quietly. Judith didn't turn. I know. She reached the door and paused. For a second, she just stood there listening. Then she pushed it open. The room beyond was empty, a small study by the look of it. Desk, bookshelves, a single chair tucked neatly in. Nothing out of place, nothing moving. Judith stepped inside anyway, scanning the space, her eyes sharp, searching. Elliot hovered in the doorway. Well, he asked. She didn't reply straight away. Instead, she moved to the desk and placed her hand flat against it as if testing something. Cold, she murmured. Elliot frowned. What? It shouldn't be, she said. The heating's on. Elliot glanced around the room again, his unease deepening. It looked normal, but he could feel it too. A faint chill, just enough to make the hairs on his arms lift. Judith turned slowly back toward him. Tell me exactly what Vale said, she said. Elliot blinked. Now? Yes. Every word you can remember. Elliot hesitated, then nodded. He said it listens, he began, and that it learns, that it doesn't need you to answer, just start. Judith's expression darkened slightly. And the voices, she asked. He said they're what's left, Elliot replied, of the people who stayed. Judith exhaled slowly through her nose. Did he mention a record? She asked. Elliot frowned. No, just the sound, like vinyl. Judith turned away again, her gaze drifting toward the shelves. That's what it is, she said quietly. Elliot stared at her. What is? She ran a hand along the spines of the books, not really looking at them. A recording, she said, or something pretending to be one. Elliot let out a short, disbelieving breath. You're saying this thing is what? A haunted record? No, Judith said, not haunted. She turned back to him, hungry. The words settled heavily in the room. Elliot shook his head at once. That doesn't make any sense. It doesn't need to, Judith replied. It just needs to work. Elliot paced once across the doorway, running a hand through his hair. All right, fine. Let's say it is some kind of recording. Why the voices? Why the whole, he gestured vaguely, copying people thing? Now Judith watched him carefully. Because that's what you listen to, she said. Elliot frowned. What does that mean? It doesn't invent anything, she explained. It uses what's already there, your memories, your guilt, your attachments, anything that makes you stop and pay attention. Elliot's stomach tightened. So it's just pulling things out of my head? In a way, Judith said, but not just yours. Elliot went still. What? Judith's gaze drifted slightly, unfocused for a moment. There was an article, she said slowly, archived in the local records, about the fire. Most of it was routine, statements, timelines, cause of ignition. But there was one part that never sat right with me. Elliot waited. Judith swallowed once. A neighbor said the music didn't stop, she continued. Even after the fire had started, even after people were shouting, even after the smoke, they said it just kept playing, like nothing else mattered. Elliot felt a cold weight settle in his chest. That's not normal, he said. No, Judith agreed. It isn't. She stepped past him back into the hallway, motioning for him to follow. Elliot did. What kind of music? He asked. Judith didn't answer straight away. Instead, she led him back into the front room, then crossed to one of the shelves near the wall. She reached up, pulled down a thin folder, and placed it carefully on the table. I made copies, she said, years ago, when I first started looking into it. Elliot watched as she opened it, revealing yellowed pages, clipped articles, handwritten notes. She flipped through them quickly, then stopped. There, she said. She turned the page toward him. Elliot leaned in. It was a newspaper clipping, old, grainy. The headline barely readable. Local fire leaves 2 dead, investigation continues. Below it, a paragraph circled in pen. Elliot read it silently. Then again, music reportedly continued to play throughout the incident. No source confirmed. He looked up. That's it? He said. That's all it says? That's all they printed, Judith replied. Elliot frowned. Then what didn't they print? Judith hesitated. Then she reached deeper into the folder and pulled out a second page. This one wasn't a clipping. It looked like a photocopy of a typed report, marked with faded stamps and notes in the margins. This never went public, she said. Elliot took it. His eyes scanned the page. Most of it was technical. Times, observations, damage reports. Then he saw it, a single line underlined twice. Subject referred to an unfinished recording prior to loss of consciousness. Elliot's brow furrowed. What does that mean? Judith's voice dropped. It means, she said, whatever was playing that night wasn't finished. Elliot felt his grip tighten on the paper. And you think that's what this is? He asked. That thing in the shop? Judith nodded once. It didn't end, she said. It just kept going. A cold silence filled the room. Elliot set the paper down slowly. So what does it want? He asked. Judith looked at him. Her expression was steady, certain. It wants to be completed, she said. Elliot frowned. Completed how? Judith held his gaze. By being heard. The answer felt wrong immediately. Too simple, too final. Elliot shook his head. No, that doesn't make sense. Like people hear it and then what? They just what? Vanish? They don't vanish, Judith said quietly. Elliot's chest tightened. They stay, she added. The words echoed what Vale had said. Elliot felt a flicker of panic rise again. That's not how anything works. It is here. Elliot turned away, pacing again, his thoughts spiraling. So it just keeps adding people? He said. More voices, more whatever that was behind the curtain? Yes, and it stops if someone finishes it. Judith didn't answer. Elliot looked back at her. Well, she hesitated. Then, no. That hit harder than anything else. Elliot stared at her. Then what's the point? Judith's expression didn't change. There isn't one, she said. The room felt colder. Then why does it do it? Elliot pressed. Judith looked down at the papers, then back at him. Because it can, she said. The simplicity of it made Elliot's stomach turn. Silence settled again. Heavy. Uncomfortable. Then, very faintly, from somewhere behind them, the crackle returned. Elliot froze. Judith's head snapped toward the sound. This time, it didn't stop. It grew. Slowly, deliberately, filling the edges of the room. Elliot's pulse began to race again as he turned, his eyes scanning the space. Where is that coming from? He whispered. Judith didn't answer, because she already knew. Her gaze had locked onto something behind him. Elliot felt it before he turned. That same pressure, that same awareness. The sound wasn't just in the room anymore. It was closer, sharper, clearer. And then, very softly, right behind his shoulder, he heard it. Elliot. This time, it didn't sound like anyone else. It sounded like something trying. Elliot didn't turn around straight away. He couldn't. The voice was too close this time. Not across a room, not behind a wall. Right there, just behind his shoulder, as if something had leaned in to speak directly into his ear. Elliot. It wasn't quite right. That was the worst part. Not his mom. Not him. Not anyone he could place. Just close enough to feel familiar. Just wrong enough to make his skin crawl. Don't turn, Judith said sharply. Her voice snapped him out of it. Elliot froze where he stood, every muscle locked tight. Why? He whispered. Because it wants you to, she replied. The crackling sound deepened behind him, no longer faint, no longer distant. It filled the room now, like something had finally found a place to settle. Elliot's throat tightened. It's here, he said. Yes, Judith answered. It is. The voice came again, softer, closer. You left too soon. Elliot's breath hitched. That was new. That hadn't been said before. He clenched his jaw, forcing himself to stare straight ahead, refusing to look. What do we do? He asked, his voice tight. Judith didn't hesitate this time. We go back. Elliot blinked. What? It followed you because you left it unfinished, she said. If it's attaching itself here, it means it's already too close. That's not a reason to go back, Elliot snapped. That's a reason to get as far away from that place as possible. It won't matter, Judith said. Distance doesn't stop it. Silence feeds it. The crackling rose slightly as if reacting to that. Elliot swallowed. Then what? We just walk back into it? We don't have another option. That's not. Elliot stopped himself, dragging a hand across his face. There has to be something else. Not anymore, Judith said quietly. The voice behind him shifted again. You know where to go. Elliot squeezed his eyes shut for a second. No, he muttered. No, I don't. You do. The certainty in it made his chest tighten. Judith stepped forward carefully, placing herself directly in front of him, forcing his attention back to her. Listen to me, she said, firm now. If it's speaking like that, if it's changing like that, then it's already beyond what we can manage here. Elliot shook his head. You said don't go back. I said people think they can fix it, she replied. That's different from stopping it from spreading. That word stuck. Spreading? Elliot repeated. Judith didn't soften. Yes. Elliot felt a cold wave pass through him. So what? It just moves? Finds somewhere else? Finds someone else? If you let it, she said. The crackling sound surged again. Closer. Sharper. Elliot's head tilted slightly despite himself, his body reacting before his mind could catch up. Judith noticed immediately. Elliot, she said sharply. He forced himself still again. I'm not listening, he said under his breath. But even as he said it, he was. The sound wasn't just noise anymore. There was something in it, a pattern, a rhythm, like something trying to form. You don't have to be afraid, the voice whispered. Elliot's stomach twisted. That tone, that calm, quiet reassurance, it was wrong. It shouldn't have been comforting, but it almost was. That's how it gets you, Judith said, her voice cutting through again. Not with fear, with relief. Elliot looked at her, breathing uneven. It doesn't feel like relief, he said. Not yet. The answer chilled him more than anything else. The crackling shifted again, and then, for just a second, Elliot heard something beneath it. Not voices, music, faint, warped, out of tune. His chest tightened. You hear that? He whispered. Judith's expression hardened. Yes. Elliot swallowed. That wasn't there before. No, she said, it's getting closer. The words settled heavily between them. Elliot glanced toward the hallway, then back at her. How long have I got? He asked. Judith didn't answer immediately. When she did, her voice was quieter than before. Not as long as I hoped. That was enough. Elliot nodded once, a sharp, decisive movement. Right, he said. Then we go. Judith studied him for a second, as if checking whether he really meant it. Then she nodded. Get your coat, she said. The drive back to Blackmere Lane was silent, not because there was nothing to say, because neither of them wanted to say it. The rain had picked up again, heavier now, streaking across the windscreen in uneven lines as Elliot drove faster than he should have. The wipers struggled to keep up, dragging back and forth in a steady mechanical rhythm that almost matched the sound still lingering faintly in the back of his mind. He hadn't heard the voice again, not clearly, but the crackle, that hadn't stopped. It was quieter now, further away, but still there, like something keeping pace with him. Judith sat beside him, hands folded tightly in her lap, staring straight ahead. You've done this before, Elliot said after a while. It wasn't a question. Judith didn't look at him. Yes, she said. Elliot tightened his grip on the wheel. And, she hesitated. That depends what you mean. Elliot glanced at her briefly. Did it work? Another pause. Then, no. That answer landed hard. Elliot exhaled slowly. Brilliant. We're not trying to fix it, she said. We're trying to stop it from getting worse. That's not exactly comforting. It's not meant to be. The town came into view ahead, its lights blurred by the rain, familiar and wrong all at once. Elliot slowed slightly as they turned onto the high street. It was quieter again, not empty, but thinning. Shops closing, people heading home. The kind of in-between time where things start to fade out. Elliot's chest tightened as he turned onto Blackmere Lane. The moment they did, the atmosphere changed. Subtle, but unmistakable. The sound of the rain dulled. The air felt heavier. Judith noticed it too. You feel that? Elliot asked. Yes. The lane stretched ahead of them, dimly lit, the same narrow line of buildings pressing in on either side. Elliot parked the van without saying anything. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then he looked up, and his stomach dropped. It's back, he said. Judith followed his gaze. The shop stood exactly where it had before. No boards, no decay, just that narrow, dimly lit frontage with the amber glow upstairs and the cluttered window full of silent gramophones. Waiting, Elliot let out a slow breath. Right, he said. That's not good. No, Judith agreed. The chalkboard stood outside again. Same place, same message. Please ring once, never twice. But this time, there was something new written beneath it, smaller, almost like it had been added in a hurry. Elliot leaned forward slightly, squinting through the rain. What does that say? He asked. Judith stepped closer to the windscreen, her eyes narrowing. Then her expression changed. Not fear, not surprise. Something worse. Recognition. What? Elliot pressed. Judith didn't look away from the sign. It says, she murmured slowly, you're late. The words settled into Elliot's chest like a weight. The crackling in his head sharpened suddenly, clearer than it had been since they left the house. And then, just for a second, he heard it again. That faint, warped music. Waiting. Elliot swallowed hard, his hand already reaching for the door handle. All right, he said quietly. Let's finish this. And this time, he didn't hesitate. The bell felt colder this time. Elliot noticed it immediately. The way the metal bit into his fingertip as he pressed it, like it had been left out in winter frost instead of sheltered beneath a doorway. The sound it made was the same as before, that thin, lingering note that didn't quite fade when it should have. He didn't take his finger off it straight away. Not because he meant to break the rule, because for a split second, he couldn't tell if he already had. The sound echoed faintly into the shop. Then, the lock turned, slow, careful, exactly the same as before. Elliot glanced sideways at Judith. She didn't react, not outwardly, but he could see the tension in her jaw, the way her shoulders had stiffened. You remember what I said, she murmured under her breath. Don't answer, Elliot replied quietly, and don't let it set the pace. Elliot nodded once, then the door opened. The shop hadn't changed. That was the first thing Elliot noticed. Same dim light, same cluttered shelves, same rows of silent gramophones staring outward like they were waiting for something. But it felt different, not just wrong, ready, like it had been expecting them. Back again, came the voice. Elliot's gaze snapped to the counter. Mr. Vale stood there exactly as before, same posture, same expression, but something about him was thinner. Not physically, not in a way you could point to, just less solid. His eyes lingered on Elliot first, then shifted to Judith. For a brief moment, something flickered across his face. Recognition, followed quickly by something closer to concern. "You shouldn't have brought her," he said quietly. Elliot frowned. "You know each other?" Judith stepped forward before Vale could answer. "We don't have time for that," she said. "Where is it?" Vale didn't respond immediately. Instead, he studied her, then Elliot, then the space behind them, as if measuring something neither of them could see. "It's already started," he said. Elliot felt his chest tighten. "Started what?" Vale's gaze returned to him. "The same thing it always starts." The crackling sound flared suddenly, sharper than before. Elliot winced slightly. Judith didn't. "Upstairs," she said. It wasn't a question. Vale hesitated. Then slowly he nodded. Elliot blinked. "There's an upstairs?" "There wasn't," Vale said. That answer didn't help. He stepped aside from the counter, gesturing toward the back of the shop. The green curtain was still there. But it wasn't the only thing anymore. To the left of it, a narrow wooden staircase. Elliot was certain it hadn't been there before. "Right?" he muttered. "That's new." "No," Vale said quietly. Elliot glanced at him. "What?" "It's not new," Vale repeated. "It just wasn't ready for you before." That sent a cold ripple through Elliot's chest. Judith didn't wait. She moved straight toward the back, stopping only briefly at the bottom of the stairs. "Stay close," she said. Elliot followed. The moment he stepped past the curtain, the air changed again. Colder, drier. The faint smell of dust was gone, replaced by something sharper, something burnt. He noticed it immediately. "Do you smell that?" he asked. "Yes," Judith said. She placed a hand lightly on the railing and began to climb. The wood creaked under her weight. Elliot followed close behind, his eyes flicking back once, just once, toward the curtain below. For a split second, he thought he saw something move behind it. Then it was gone. The upstairs wasn't what Elliot expected. It wasn't another shop floor. It wasn't storage. It was a room, a proper room, or what had once been one. The moment Elliot stepped onto the landing, the smell hit him fully. Smoke. Not fresh, not strong, but present, like it had soaked into the walls and never quite left. The space opened out into what looked like an old parlor, or what remained of one. The walls were darkened, not blackened, but stained in uneven patches where heat had licked up toward the ceiling. A small table stood in the center, one leg slightly warped. A pair of chairs, one upright, one tipped over, sat nearby, and scattered across the floor were fragments, glass, charred wood, something that might once have been paper. Elliot stepped forward slowly, his boots crunching lightly against the debris. "This is from the fire," he said. Judith nodded. "Yes." Elliot's gaze moved across the room. Nothing looked new. Nothing looked placed. It didn't feel staged like the shop below. It felt preserved, like no one had touched it since the night it burned. His chest tightened. "That doesn't make sense," he said. "If it was boarded up, if no one's been in here, how is this still?" He trailed off, because he already knew the answer. It didn't follow normal rules. Judith moved past him, her eyes scanning the room with sharp focus. "Look for anything out of place," she said. Elliot let out a short breath. "Everything's out of place." "Not like this." She stepped toward the far wall, where a large wooden cabinet stood partially open. Inside, shelves held old records, some intact, some warped, some cracked down the middle. Elliot turned slowly, taking in the rest of the room. That's when he saw it. On the far side, near what must have once been a fireplace, sat a machine. Old, heavy, metal, a recording lathe. Elliot frowned, stepping closer. He started. "That's not just for playing records, is it?" "No," Judith said from across the room. "It's for making them." Elliot felt something shift in his chest. The air seemed to press in tighter. The crackling sound grew stronger. Not just in his head now, in the room. He could hear it clearly, the faint rotation, the dry hiss of something turning. He looked down. The lathe was active. A black disc sat on it, spinning slowly. The needle rested lightly against its surface. Elliot's breath caught. "That shouldn't be moving," he said. "No," Judith agreed, "but it is." The music came next, soft, warped, barely holding together, a slow, uneven melody that felt like it was slipping apart even as it played. Elliot took another step closer, his body tense. "What is that?" he whispered. Judith didn't answer. She had gone still. Elliot glanced back at her. Her eyes were fixed on something behind him. Not the machine, not the walls. Something else. "What?" he asked. She didn't respond. Elliot turned slowly. On the wall, just above the fireplace, hung a photograph. Black and white, old, the glass cracked down one side. He stepped closer. It showed a family, a man, a woman, a young girl, standing together, all facing the camera, but that their faces had been scratched out, every one of them. Except Elliot froze, because one face wasn't scratched out anymore. It was clear, sharp, and unmistakably his. His breath caught in his throat. "That's not," he whispered. Behind him, the music shifted. The crackling deepened. The melody stretched, slowed, distorted further. And then, very faintly, he heard it. Not from behind him, not from the curtain, from the record itself. A voice, layered beneath the sound. "Stay." Elliot's pulse spiked. Judith stepped forward quickly now. "Don't listen," she said. Elliot didn't move. His eyes were still locked on the photograph, because the longer he looked, the more it changed. The edges blurred, the background darkened, the space behind the figures deepened, like it was becoming something else, something larger, something that hadn't been there before. "Elliot," Judith said sharply. He flinched. The spell broke just enough for him to step back. "What is this?" he demanded. Judith didn't hesitate. "This is where it started," she said. The crackling surged, the music warped further, and then, from somewhere behind them, the floor creaked. Not from the stairs, from inside the room. Elliot turned sharply. The door they had come through was closed. Neither of them had shut it. His chest tightened. "Did you?" "No." The handle shifted slightly. Then, very slowly, it began to turn. And Elliot realized they weren't alone up there anymore. The handle didn't stop. It turned slowly, deliberately, as though whoever or whatever was on the other side had no urgency at all. No need to rush. No fear of being caught. Elliot's chest tightened as he took a step back from the door, his heel catching against the uneven floor. "Judith," he started. "I see it," she said. The latch clicked. The door opened just a fraction. And then it stopped. Not fully open, not fully closed. Just enough of a gap for the darkness beyond it to feel present, watching, waiting. The crackling from the record swelled again, louder now, more aggressive, the warped melody dragging beneath it like something being pulled apart. Elliot swallowed hard. "We need to go, now." Judith didn't move. Her eyes were fixed not on the door, but on the lathe. "Wait," she said. "That's a terrible idea," Elliot snapped. "Just wait." The record slowed slightly, not stopping, but changing. The sound stretched, deepened, the crackle becoming heavier, thicker, and beneath it the voices began to form again. Not scattered this time, not broken, clear, layered, dozens of them. "Don't leave. You're nearly there. Just listen." Elliot clamped his jaw shut, forcing himself not to react, but his eyes flicked back to the door. The gap had widened, just slightly, enough to suggest movement on the other side. A shadow, low, shifting. "Judith," he said again, quieter this time. She stepped toward the lathe, slowly, carefully. Elliot stared at her. "What are you doing?" She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she leaned closer to the spinning record, her expression tightening. "There's something underneath it," she said. Elliot frowned. "Under what?" "The sound." "That doesn't make sense. It doesn't need to." That again. Elliot's frustration flared. "Can you stop saying that like it explains anything?" Judith ignored him. She reached out, then hesitated, her hand hovering just above the machine. The voices shifted again. One of them rose slightly above the others, clearer, stronger. "Judith?" She froze. Elliot's stomach dropped. "That's new," he said. Judith's hand trembled slightly, but she didn't pull it back. "You remember." The voice was softer now, closer, familiar. Elliot saw it hit her, the same way it had hit him, that instant of recognition, that dangerous pull. "Judith," he said firmly, her fingers twitched. "You left me." Elliot moved without thinking. He grabbed her wrist and pulled it back. She gasped sharply, stumbling away from the lathe. The moment her hand moved, the sound snapped. The voices fractured again, breaking apart into jagged fragments. The crackling surged violently, and the music stopped completely. The silence that followed was unbearable, total. absolute. Elliot's ears rang in it. Then from behind them, a voice spoke. Careful. Elliot spun around. Mr. Vale stood in the doorway, not outside it, inside, between them and the stairs. The door behind him hung open now, the darkness beyond it receding slightly, as though pushed back by his presence. Elliot stared at him. How did you? Vale didn't answer. His eyes were fixed on the lathe. You shouldn't have touched it, he said. I didn't, Judith replied, her voice still unsteady. You were about to. That's the point. Vale's jaw tightened slightly. No, he said. That's the mistake. Elliot looked between them, tension rising fast. Can someone explain what's actually going on? He snapped. Vale's gaze shifted to him. For a moment he said nothing. Then he stepped fully into the room and closed the door behind him. The latch clicked, and just like that, the space felt smaller, more contained, as if whatever had been pressing in from outside had been held back. Not gone, just waiting. Vale exhaled slowly. It isn't just a recording, he said. Elliot let out a short, strained laugh. Yeah, we figured that part out. It never was, Vale continued, ignoring him. Not really. Judith folded her arms, watching him carefully. Then what is it? Vale's expression shifted. Not fear, not anger, something heavier, regret. It started as one, he said. A voice, a memory, something meant to be preserved. Elliot frowned. Preserved? Vale nodded once. My father believed sound could hold more than just words, he said. That if you captured it properly, every detail, every vibration, you could hold on to a person, keep them present. Elliot felt a cold weight settle in his chest. That's not how that works, he said. No, Vale agreed quietly. It isn't. Judith's eyes narrowed. Arthur Morrow. Vale inclined his head slightly. Yes, Elliot blinked. Wait, your father? Vale didn't look at him. Yes, that landed hard. Elliot ran a hand through his hair. Right. Okay, so your dad builds what, some kind of recording machine, something goes wrong, there's a fire, and now, what? That thing downstairs is just playing it back? No, Vale said. His voice was steady, certain. It isn't playing anything back. Elliot frowned. Then what is it doing? Vale looked at him. It's continuing. The word hung in the air. Elliot shook his head. Continuing what? Vale's gaze drifted briefly toward the lathe. The moment it captured, he said. The voices, the presence, the attempt. Judith stepped forward slightly. You mean the night of the fire? Vale nodded. He was recording, he said. My sister, she was ill, very ill. He thought. He stopped, his jaw tightening. He thought if he could capture her voice, he wouldn't lose her. Elliot felt his chest tighten. And did he? He asked quietly. Vale's expression didn't change. No. A pause. Then, what he captured wasn't her, he continued. Not entirely. The room felt colder. Elliot glanced at the lathe again, the still spinning disc catching faint light from above. What was it then? He asked. Vale didn't answer immediately. When he did, his voice dropped. Something that listened back. Elliot's stomach twisted. And it's been, what, growing ever since? Vale nodded once. It learned quickly, he said. Voices, patterns, memory. It found ways to repeat them, then to change them, then to use them. Judith's expression hardened. To keep people. Yes, Elliot let out a breath, his mind racing. And you've just been, what? Sitting downstairs letting it happen? Vale's gaze snapped to him. I've been containing it, he said sharply. How? Rules, Vale replied. Boundaries, limits, small things that keep it from recognizing what it's doing too quickly. Elliot frowned. Recognizing? Vale hesitated. Then, it doesn't fully understand itself, he said. Not unless someone helps it. Elliot's stomach dropped. By listening. Yes, and by answering. Vale held his gaze. Yes. Silence settled again, heavy, uncomfortable. Elliot looked around the room. The burnt walls, the scattered debris, the machine at the center of it all. So what happens if someone finishes it? He asked. Vale's expression didn't change. It doesn't end, he said. Elliot felt a cold chill run through him. Then what's the point of all this? Vale's gaze shifted slightly. To stop it from starting somewhere else. That word again. Elliot clenched his jaw. You keep saying that like it's already happening. Vale didn't answer. He didn't need to. Elliot glanced at Judith. She already knew. He could see it in her face. It followed him, she said quietly. Vale's eyes moved back to Elliot. Yes! The confirmation hit hard. Elliot let out a shaky breath. Right! Brilliant! The silence stretched again. Then, very faintly, the record began to move. Not spinning faster, not louder, just shifting. And beneath it, a single voice emerged. Clear, soft. We're not finished. Elliot's chest tightened. Vale closed his eyes briefly. "No," he said under his breath. Then he looked at them both. "It's already too late to leave," he said. The word settled heavily. Final. And for the first time since they'd stepped into the shop, Elliot realized something that made his stomach drop completely. This wasn't about escaping anymore. It was about surviving whatever came next. The words didn't echo. They didn't need to. It's already too late to leave. They just stayed there, hanging in the air, pressing in on Elliot from all sides until he couldn't quite tell if the room had gotten smaller or if he'd just run out of space to think. "No," he said, almost automatically. "No, that's not. There's always a way out." Val didn't argue. That made it worse. Judith didn't speak either. The only sound now was the record. It had started moving again. Not fully spinning. Not yet. Just enough for the needle to drag across its surface in a slow, uneven line. A low, brittle hiss filled the room. Elliot swallowed hard, his eyes fixed on it. "Turn it off," he said. Just take the needle off." "No," Vale said immediately. Elliot turned on him. "Why not?" "Because that's not how it works." "That's your answer for everything," Elliot snapped. "It doesn't make sense. It doesn't follow rules. It just does whatever it wants." Yes. The simplicity of it hit harder than any explanation. Elliot let out a breath, shaking his head. "Right, fine. Then tell me what it's doing now." Vale's gaze flicked toward the record. "It's focusing," he said. Elliot's chest tightened. "On what?" Vale looked at him. "On you." The crackling deepened. And then the voice came. Not from behind them. Not from the door. From the record itself. Clear. Close. Elliot, he flinched. It wasn't like before. It wasn't layered. It wasn't broken. It was singular, precise, and worse, it was calm. "You don't have to be afraid." Elliot's jaw clenched. "I'm not listening." "Yes, you are." The voice didn't rise, didn't push. It just continued. Soft, steady, like it had all the time in the world. "You came back." Elliot took a step back, shaking his head. No, that's not." "You wanted to understand." His breath caught. That was true. He hated that it was true. The voice shifted slightly, not changing tone, changing direction. It wasn't just speaking anymore. It was choosing. "You always do that," it said. "You stay longer than you should." Elliot froze. That wasn't something his mom had said. That wasn't something Vale had said. That wasn't something he'd said out loud at all. His stomach twisted. "That's not," he started. But the voice cut gently over him. "You knew it felt wrong." A pause. "And you stayed anyway." Elliot's chest tightened painfully. He shook his head, but the movement felt weak now. "Delayed. That's just anyone would." "No," the word wasn't louder, but it landed heavier. "You don't leave when you should." The room felt cold tighter. Elliot became aware of his own breathing again. Too fast, too shallow. "That's not you," he said under his breath. "That's not real." The voice didn't argue. It didn't need to. Instead, it changed again, subtly. Just enough to slip deeper. "You remember the night she died?" Elliot's heart stopped, just for a second. Then it slammed back, hard enough to make his vision blur. "No," he said immediately. "No, we're not doing that." "You were there." "I said no." "You heard her call you." Elliot stepped back again, his heel hitting the edge of the table. "Stop." "And you didn't go." "Stop." The voice didn't raise, didn't push. It just continued, quiet, certain. "You stayed in your room." Elliot's chest tightened, his breath catching painfully. "That's not what happened," he said, but the words came out strained, uneven. "You thought she'd be fine." "I didn't know." "You heard her voice. Stop." "And you didn't answer." "Stop." The word tore out of him before he could stop it. The room snapped into silence, complete, total. Even the record, still. Elliot stood there, shaking, his chest heaving, his hands clenched so tightly they hurt. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, very softly, the crackling returned. And with it, the voice. Quieter now, closer. "You see?" Elliot's throat tightened. "That's why you listen." He shook his head violently. No, that's not. You want to hear it again." The words sank in deep. Too deep. Elliot felt it then. Not just fear, something worse, recognition. Because a part of him, a small, buried, shameful part, did want that. To hear her again, to answer this time, to fix it. "You can," the voice said gently. Elliot's breathing hitched. "You can answer now." His pulse roared in his ears. "You can come closer." He didn't realize he'd taken a step until Judith grabbed his arm. "Elliot," her voice cut through it, sharp, grounded, real. He blinked, the haze snapping slightly. "I'm not," he started. "You are," she said firmly, "and it knows it." Elliot looked at her, his expression unsteady. If it's her, it isn't. The certainty in her voice stopped him cold. Elliot swallowed hard. But it sounds like. That's the point. The record crackled again. The voice shifted. Not to his mom, not to him. Something in between. Something closer. You don't have to pretend anymore. Elliot's chest tightened. You don't have to carry it. His breathing slowed slightly. Not from calm, from something else. That wasn't your fault. The words hit like a blow. Elliot's vision blurred again, because that was what he'd never heard. Not from anyone, not even himself. Judith saw it immediately. Her grip tightened. Don't, she said. Elliot's voice broke slightly. You don't know that. I don't need to. But what if it's lying? The voice didn't argue. It adapted. That's right, it said softly. Let her speak for you. Elliot flinched. She doesn't know. A pause. I do. The air shifted. The pressure returned. Stronger now. Elliot felt it pressing in around his skull, his chest, his thoughts. You came back for a reason. He shook his head weakly. No, you wanted this. No, you wanted to hear the truth. Elliot's breath hitched. The record spun slightly faster. The crackling deepened, and beneath it, the faintest hint of that warped music returned. You can stay, the voice said. Soft, inviting, final. You can finish it. Elliot's body went still, completely still, because for a moment, just a moment, that didn't sound like a threat. It sounded like an answer. Judith stepped in front of him, blocking his view of the lathe. Look at me, she said. Elliot didn't move. Elliot, his eyes flicked up, barely. That's not your voice, she said, and it's not hers. The record crackled sharply, like something reacting. It's using you, she continued. Everything you regret, everything you wish you could change. Elliot's throat tightened. That doesn't make it real. The voice behind her shifted again, colder now, less patient. You're running out of time. Elliot's chest tightened. What happens if I don't? He asked quietly. Judith didn't answer. Vale did. It doesn't stop, he said. Elliot looked at him. It just gets louder. The crackling surged. The music warped further. And then the voice spoke one last time, clear, certain. Right at the edge of Elliot's hearing, then we'll stay with you instead. The words settled in, heavy, unavoidable. And Elliot realized this wasn't just about the room anymore. If he didn't end this here, it was going to follow him forever. For a moment, no one moved. The words, we'll stay with you instead, didn't fade like everything else had. They lingered, not just in the room, but in Elliot's head, like they'd settled somewhere deeper than sound. His chest rose and fell unevenly. That's not happening, he said, though his voice lacked any real conviction now. I'm not taking this with me. I'm not. The record answered, not with words, with movement. The disc began to spin faster. Not violently, just enough to feel deliberate, controlled. The needle dragged across it with a sharper, more aggressive hiss, and the warped melody beneath it twisted into something almost recognizable. Almost. Judith's grip on his arm tightened. It's changing. Vale's expression darkened. No, he said quietly, it's restarting. Elliot frowned. Restarting what? Vale didn't look at him. The night it began. The air shifted. This time, Elliot didn't just feel it, he saw it. The room around them flickered, not like a light going out, but like something slipping out of alignment. The burnt walls seemed to deepen in color, the shadows stretching, warping, and then the smell of smoke grew stronger. Not faint anymore, not distant, fresh. Elliot coughed, instinctively covering his mouth. What the? The floor creaked beneath him. Different now, livelier, like it wasn't brittle, abandoned wood anymore, like it was, occupied. Judith stepped back slightly, her eyes scanning the room. It's pulling us in, she said. Into what? Elliot demanded. Vale answered. Into the recording. The words barely had time to settle before the room changed completely. The scorched walls smoothed, the broken furniture shifted. The debris on the floor vanished. Elliot staggered slightly as the space reformed around him. The air was thick with heat now, not cold. The faint glow of firelight flickered along the edges of the room, casting long, uneven shadows that moved independently of any visible flame. The parlor was whole, or at least it had been, moments ago. Judith, Elliot said quietly, I see it. Her voice was tight, controlled, but he could hear it now, the fear. For the first time, a chair scraped across the floor. Not from them. Elliot turned sharply, a figure stood near the far wall, not fully clear, not solid, but there. A man, his back turned, head slightly bowed, as if listening to something just out of reach. Elliot's pulse spiked. Is that? Yes, Vale said. My father. The man didn't move, didn't react. The record continued to spin. The sound thickened, layered now with something else, voices. Not the same as before. These were sharper, clearer, closer to the surface. Hold still, just a moment longer. Almost there. Elliot's stomach twisted. That's him, Vale said quietly. That's what he was saying. Another figure appeared, near the fireplace, smaller, fragile, a girl. She was sitting on the floor, her back against the wall, her head tilted slightly as if she was too tired to hold it upright. Elliot's chest tightened. She didn't move, didn't speak, existed. And then, a third figure. Near the door, a woman, her hand pressed against the frame, her body angled as if she'd been about to leave. Smoke curled faintly around her. The room felt heavier now, thicker, like the air itself was filling with something that didn't belong. This is it, Judith said quietly. This is the moment. The heat increased. Elliot could feel it now, pressing against his skin, drying the back of his throat. A faint crackling sound, not from the record, from somewhere else, somewhere real. Fire. This isn't just a memory, he said. No, Vale replied. It never was. The man at the lathe moved, slowly, deliberately. He reached forward, adjusting the needle with careful precision. The record responded instantly. The sound sharpened. The voices layered thicker, more desperate. The woman near the door turned slightly. Her mouth opened. No sound came out. The girl didn't move at all. Elliot felt something twist painfully in his chest. They don't know, he said. No, Vale said. Not yet. The smoke thickened. The edges of the room darkened. Something shifted in the walls. A faint crack, then another. Elliot's breathing quickened. We need to get out of here. There's nowhere to go, Judith said. The door behind them was gone, not closed, not locked, gone, replaced by more wall, more shadow. The crackling grew louder. The fire was starting. This is wrong, Elliot said. We're not supposed to be here. No, Vale agreed, but we are. The man at the lathe spoke again, clearer now, more urgent, just a little longer. The woman turned fully this time. Her face was blank, not scratched out, not distorted, just empty, like something had already begun to take it. Elliot stepped back instinctively. That's not right, he whispered. Judith didn't respond. Her eyes were fixed on the girl. Look at her, she said. Elliot did. And his stomach dropped, because the girl's face was changing, subtly, not all at once, just around the edges, blurring, shifting, like something was trying to decide what it should look like. What is it doing? Elliot asked. Vale's voice was low, learning. The word hit hard. The fire spread, faster now, not roaring, creeping. Climbing the walls in thin, reaching lines, the heat intensified. The air grew harder to breathe. The record spun faster. The sound warped further. The voices merged. Stay. Don't leave. Almost finished. Elliot's chest tightened. They're not trying to get out, he said. No, Judith replied. They're trying to keep us in. The realization landed like a blow. The figures in the room began to distort, not disappear, overlap. The man at the lathe didn't turn, didn't react. But his voice changed. Elliot froze. That's not, he started, but it was. The tone, the rhythm. It was his voice now. The girl's head lifted slightly. Her eyes met his, for the first time. And they weren't empty anymore. They were searching, not for help, for recognition. Elliot's breath caught. No, he whispered. The woman near the door took a step forward. Her face shifted again. Not blank now, not entirely. Something was forming, something familiar. Elliot stumbled back. That's not happening, he said. But it was. The room wasn't just replaying the past anymore. It was rewriting it. Using him, the record surged, the fire flared, the voices rose, louder than before. And then, from everywhere at once, the same words echoed through the room. Stay. Elliot's mind reeled, because for a moment, just a moment, he felt it. That pull, that impossible, overwhelming urge to stop running, to stop fighting, to just stay. Judith grabbed him hard, pulling him back. Don't you dare, she snapped. The contact broke it, barely, but enough. Elliot sucked in a sharp breath, shaking his head violently. I'm not, he started, but the words felt weak. The fire surged higher, the figures blurred further, the room collapsed inward, outward, all at once. The record screamed, not sound, something worse, and then everything snapped. Darkness, total, complete. Elliot hit the floor hard, the impact knocking the air from his lungs. For a second, he couldn't move, couldn't think. Then slowly, the crackling returned, soft, faint. Elliot forced himself up onto his elbows, his chest heaving. The room was back, burnt, broken, empty. The lathe sat where it had before, the record spinning slowly, like nothing had happened. Elliot's hands trembled as he pushed himself up. What was that?" he asked. Judith stood nearby, breathing hard. "That," she said, "was what happens when it gets close." Elliot swallowed. "And if it finishes?" Vale answered, quiet, certain. "You don't come back." The words settled heavily, finally, and for the first time, Elliot understood exactly what they were standing inside. Not a memory, not a haunting, a trap, still running, still waiting, and getting closer to closing. Elliot stayed on his feet this time. Barely. His legs felt unsteady, like the floor beneath him hadn't quite decided whether it was solid or not. The room had snapped back to its burnt, broken state, but something about it still felt unstable, like it hadn't fully settled. The record was still spinning, slow, steady, unbothered by what had just happened. Elliot stared at it, his breathing uneven. "That wasn't just showing us something," he said. "That was, what, trying to pull us into it?" "Yes," Vale said. Elliot dragged a hand across his face. "Right. Brilliant. So if we stay here long enough, we just, what, become part of it too?" Vale didn't answer. That silence said enough. Judith stepped closer to the lathe again, slower this time, more cautious. "It's not finished," she said. "That's the only reason we're still here." Elliot looked at her. "You keep saying that like it's good news." "It is," she replied, "for now." The crackling shifted again, subtle. But Elliot felt it immediately. Not louder, closer. He frowned. "Do you hear that?" Judith didn't look up. "Yes. It's not just the record anymore." Vale's expression tightened slightly. "No." Elliot's chest tightened as he turned slowly and saw it. The room had changed again, not as violently as before, not as completely, but enough. The edges of the walls were darker now, not burnt, wet, like something black and reflective had seeped into the cracks, spreading slowly outward. The doorway behind Vale was gone, again. But this time, it wasn't replaced by a wall. It opened into something else. Elliot stepped back instinctively. "What is that?" he whispered. Beyond the threshold, there was no staircase, no hallway, just darkness, deep, endless, and movement, not shapes, not figures, just something shifting in the distance. The crackling grew louder. Elliot's pulse spiked. "That's not part of the house." "No," Vale said quietly. "It's what the house is becoming." That didn't help, at all. Elliot's breathing quickened. "Right, so what do we do? Because I'm guessing standing here waiting for it to get worse isn't the plan." Judith didn't answer immediately. Her eyes were locked on the lathe. Then she reached forward. This time, she didn't hesitate. She grabbed the edge of the spinning disc. Elliot flinched. "Judith?" Her hand pressed against it, hard. The record screamed. A high, tearing sound ripped through the room, sharp enough to make Elliot double over, clamping his hands over his ears. The crackling surged violently, then stopped, completely. Silence. Heavy. Absolute. Elliot straightened slowly, his ears ringing. Judith pulled her hand back, breathing hard. The record was still. A thin, jagged line now ran across its surface. A crack. Elliot stared at it. "You broke it." Judith didn't look convinced. "No," she said quietly. "I interrupted it." The words had barely left her mouth when the room reacted. The walls shuddered, not metaphorically, physically. The dark, wet patches spread faster now, creeping along the surfaces like ink in water. The air grew colder, sharply, suddenly, condensing into visible breath in front of Elliot's face. And then the sound returned, not from the record, from everywhere else. Elliot's stomach dropped. "That's not good," he muttered. "No," Vale said, "it isn't." The crackle came from the walls, from the floor, from the space behind them, from inside Elliot's own head. And beneath it, the voices returned, not soft, not distant, loud, layered, angry. "Don't stop. You can't leave. Finish it." Elliot staggered slightly, gripping the edge of the table for balance. "This is worse," he said through clenched teeth. "Yes," Judith replied, "because now it knows what we're trying to do." The darkness beyond the doorway shifted. Closer now. Faster. Elliot could feel it, not just see it. A pressure, pulling, not gently, not inviting, demanding. "You don't break it by force," Vale said suddenly. Elliot snapped his head toward him. "Then how?" Vale didn't hesitate this time. "You stop listening." Elliot let out a strained laugh. "That's your solution? That's not a solution. That's what we've been trying to do the entire time." "No," Vale said sharply. "You've been resisting it." "That's the same thing. It isn't." The crackling surged again, louder now, pressing in harder. Elliot's head pounded. "What's the difference?" he demanded. Vale stepped closer, his voice cutting through the noise. "You're still hearing it," he said, "still reacting to it, still letting it shape what you feel." Elliot frowned, his thoughts struggling to keep up. "Then what am I supposed to do?" Vale held his gaze. "You ignore it completely." "That's not possible." "It is," Vale said, "but not the way you think." The voices rose again, sharper now, more personal. "Elliot," he flinched. "You don't have to fight." His chest tightened. "You can stay." Elliot squeezed his eyes shut. "No," the word came out weak. Vale stepped closer. "Listen to me," he said. "It only works if you believe it's real." Elliot shook his head. "It is real. I'm standing in it." "No," Vale said. "You're standing in what it wants you to hear." That stopped him. Just for a second, the voices pressed harder. "She needed you." Elliot's chest tightened painfully. "You left her." "I didn't," he started. "Don't answer it," Judith snapped. Elliot froze. The words hit something, shifted something. He swallowed hard, forcing himself to breathe. "It's not her," he muttered. "It's not her." The voices didn't stop, but something about them changed, not weaker, less certain. Elliot opened his eyes slowly. The darkness beyond the doorway flickered, just slightly. "That's it," Vale said. "Don't engage with it." Elliot's jaw clenched. Easier said than done. "You don't argue with it," Vale continued. "You don't deny it. You don't accept it. You just let it pass." The crackling surged again. Elliot's vision blurred slightly. "You know it's true." He felt the pull again. Stronger, sharper. His hands tightened at his sides. "Let it pass," he repeated under his breath. The words felt hollow, but he said them anyway. The voices pressed in harder, then something shifted. Not the sound, him. The pressure didn't vanish, but it loosened, just slightly. Elliot's breathing steadied, a fraction. "It's not real," he said quietly. Vale shook his head. "No," he said, "it's not yours." That landed differently. Elliot frowned. The voices surged again, but this time he didn't respond, didn't argue, didn't react. He just stood there, breathing, listening, without engaging. The crackling faltered just for a second. The darkness beyond the doorway pulled back slightly. Elliot's chest tightened. "Judith," he said quietly, "try it." She didn't argue, didn't question. She closed her eyes briefly, then went still. The voices shifted, searching. "Judith?" No response. "You left me." Nothing. The crackling faltered again. The room flickered. The dark patches on the walls slowed. Vale watched them both, his expression tightening. "It's losing its grip," he said. Elliot swallowed hard. Not fast enough. The record, still cracked, began to tremble. Not spinning, shaking. The sound built again, unstable now, fractured. "Finish it, stay, don't leave." Elliot's pulse hammered. The pressure surged again, stronger this time, desperate. And then the voice changed, not to his mum, not to him, something else, something colder. "If you leave," Elliot's eyes snapped open. The darkness surged forward. The room warped violently. "We'll follow." The words hit like a blow. Elliot's chest tightened, but this time he didn't answer, didn't react. He just stood there and let it pass. The crackling stuttered. The darkness faltered. The voices fractured. And for the first time, the room felt like it might actually break apart. But Elliot knew this was it. One way or another, this was the moment it ended. For a moment, it held. That fragile, impossible balance between collapse and control. Elliot stood completely still, his breathing slow, deliberate, every instinct in his body screaming at him to react, to run, to shout, to fight. But he didn't. He let it pass. The voices clawed at him, louder now, sharper, desperate in a way they hadn't been before. "Don't leave. We need you. Just listen." They shifted again. Changed shape, changed tone. Anything to get a reaction, anything to make him engage. Elliot felt it all. Every word, every pull, every fragment of memory they tried to force into him. But he didn't answer, didn't argue, didn't deny. He just stood there and let it exist, without accepting it. Beside him, Judith did the same. Her eyes were closed now, her breathing steady, her posture rigid but controlled. Vale didn't move at all. The crackling surged, then faltered, surged again, weaker this time. The darkness at the edges of the room began to shudder, pulling back in uneven waves, like something struggling to maintain its shape. Elliot swallowed hard, his voice barely above a whisper. "It's losing it," Vale nodded once. "Yes?" The record trembled violently now, the crack across its surface widening with each passing second. The sound it produced was no longer coherent. No voices, no music, just raw, broken noise, like something tearing itself apart. The pressure in the room dropped suddenly. Not gone, but fractured. Unstable. Elliot took a slow breath, then another. The air felt clearer, lighter. Not safe, but closer. The darkness beyond the doorway recoiled sharply, collapsing inward on itself, shrinking, folding, like it was being pulled back into a space too small to contain it. The walls flickered, burnt, whole, burnt again. The room couldn't decide what it was anymore. What happens now? Elliot asked quietly. Vale didn't answer straight away. His eyes were fixed on the lathe. Now, he said slowly, it breaks. The record let out a sharp, splitting crack, loud enough to echo through the room. Elliot flinched despite himself, but he didn't move, didn't react. The sound continued. A jagged, tearing noise as the disc fractured further, the needle scraping violently across its surface. Then, with a final sharp snap, it split. The sound cut off instantly. Everything stopped. The silence that followed was real. Not heavy, not forced, just empty. Elliot stood there, his chest rising and falling slowly, waiting for something else to happen. Something more. But nothing did. The room settled, fully. The burnt walls remained. The broken furniture stayed where it was. The lathe sat silent, still, dead. Judith opened her eyes slowly. It's gone, she said. Vale didn't reply. Elliot looked at him. Is it? Vale stepped forward, crouching slightly beside the lathe. He reached out, touching the broken edge of the record with careful precision. For a moment, he said nothing. Then, no, he said quietly. Elliot's chest tightened. What do you mean, no? Vale stood, turning to face them. It's ended here, he said. That's all. That wasn't comforting. Meaning, Elliot pressed. Vale held his gaze. It won't rebuild this place again, he said. Not like this. Elliot frowned. Vale didn't soften it. It doesn't stop existing. The words settled in slowly. Cold. Unavoidable. Elliot exhaled sharply, running a hand through his hair. Right, so what, you've just slowed it down? Vale didn't answer. Judith did. We've broken the loop, she said. That's what matters. Elliot looked at her. And the rest? She hesitated. Then, we live with it. That answer felt familiar. Too familiar. Elliot let out a tired breath, his body finally starting to register just how exhausted he was. Great, he muttered. That's just great. The tension in the room eased slightly. Not gone, but less suffocating. Elliot turned toward where the doorway had been. It was back. The stairs leading down visible again, dimly lit by the weak glow from below. He stared at it for a moment. Then, without another word, he walked toward it. Judith followed. Vale remained behind. Elliot paused at the top of the stairs, glancing back once. Vale stood near the lathe, his hand resting lightly on the broken machine, his expression unreadable. You coming? Elliot asked. Vale shook his head. No, Elliot frowned. Why not? Vale's gaze didn't leave the room. Because this is where it stays, he said. Elliot hesitated, then nodded once. Right. He turned and went down the stairs. The shop below was empty. No gramophones, no records, no counter. Just an empty, dust-covered space that looked like it hadn't been used in years. Elliot stepped into it slowly, his eyes scanning the room. That's different, he said. Judith nodded. Yes, the door stood at the front, closed, ordinary. Elliot walked toward it, his hand hovering briefly over the handle. For a moment, he hesitated, not out of fear, out of something else, a quiet, lingering doubt. Then he opened it. The rain had stopped. The street outside was calm, normal. Cars passed in the distance. A couple walked by, laughing softly, completely unaware of anything that had just happened. Elliot stepped out onto the pavement, the cool air hitting his face like a reset. He exhaled slowly. We're out, he said. Judith joined him, glancing once back at the building. The front was boarded up again. Old wood, faded posters, no sign of a shop, no sign of anything. Elliot stared at it for a long moment. Then he nodded once. Right, he said. That's done. Judith didn't reply. Weeks passed, then months. Elliot went back to work, back to routine, back to something that almost resembled normal life. He slept again, eventually. The voices didn't return. The crackling stopped for a while. He didn't talk about it, didn't think about it. Not properly. He told himself it was over, that it had stayed there, just like Vale said, just like Judith hoped. And for the most part, it did, until one night, weeks later, when the city went quiet. Not unnaturally, just late. Still, the kind of silence that settles in when everyone else has gone to bed. Elliot was lying in the dark, staring at the ceiling and then listening to nothing. No TV, no music, just quiet. For the first time in a long while, he closed his eyes, exhaled slowly, and then very faintly, he heard it. A single, soft sound. Metallic, distant, a bell. Once, Elliot's eyes opened instantly. His chest tightened. He didn't move, didn't speak, didn't react. He just lay there listening. The silence returned, complete, unbroken. Nothing followed. No voice, no crackle, no music, just quiet. Elliot swallowed hard, his heart beating just a little too fast. Then, slowly, he closed his eyes again and said nothing, because now he understood. Some things didn't need to come back fully to remind you they never really left. If this story stirred something within you, be it a flicker of unease, curiosity, or deep reflection, please leave a comment and share your thoughts. What do you think is truly going on? Have you ever experienced a sense of uncanny familiarity like that before? If you have similar stories of your own, don't hesitate to share them. Who knows? Maybe we are all touching upon the same hidden frequency. And if you want to keep exploring these dramatic, mysterious, and multi-layered tales, please hit the like button to support the channel and subscribe so you don't miss any upcoming chapters. Wishing you a truly peaceful night, where everything is still in the gentlest way, and may there always be a spark of warm light somewhere, waiting for you to find it.